I fixed the stream stuff, so now we're live on my channel as well.
Cool. Well, then we're ready to go. So I'm going to do this quick. We'll kick it over to you, Daniel. Sorry, it sounds a little bit like there's a jet taking off. That's a furnace here. But I'll kick it over to you, Daniel, for that 10-minute opening. And then MrGirl has said that he's happy to have open discussion after that, deferring on his own opening statement. And then again, just a reminder that MrGirl had said, hey, can you just promise me that it'll be just a back and forth where it doesn't get to be too long or heavy-winded on either side during the open discussion. So that's, if you guys can do me a favor, keep an eye on yourselves, and I'll jump in. If it gets to be a little bit long, I'll jump in just to keep the conversation moving. Does that sound good?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. All right, here we go in 3, 2, 1. Ready, set. Hey, everybody. Tonight we're debating whether or not sexual liberation is good, and we are starting right now with Daniel Haqiqatjou's opening statement. Thanks so much for being with us. Daniel, the floor is all yours for your opening statement.
Okay, my pleasure. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu salam ala rasulillah. I want to give two main arguments for why we should all reject sexual liberation. First, the totalitarianism argument. We all want an ordered society. Order means cooperation and non-aggression. It means that people work together to produce food, maintain shelter, defend against outside attacks. It means people don't harm each other, destroy each other's property, steal or molest. Without order, life is just nasty, brutish, and short. So how do you prevent this chaos and maintain order? There are two approaches, top-down versus bottom-up. We all know the top-down approach. There's a centralized government that enforces laws that prevent us from harming each other and requires us to cooperate. The government uses technologies to enforce laws and maintain social order. Historically, most of human civilization has not had this top-down system, mainly because centralization, surveillance, and enforcement require technology. If someone decides to attack you, you use technology like your phone to call the police. The police use cars to get you to you as quickly as possible, and firearms to apply deadly force efficiently. Technology is essential to maintain order. Without these technologies, anyone can assault you or destroy your property, and by the time authorities find out, you're dead. So how did societies maintain order prior to these technologies? For most human history, order was not top-down, but rather bottom-up. This social order through organic, biologically rooted relationships of marriage, family, community, and religion. When you're married to someone in a reciprocal relationship of commitment and care, you're less inclined to harm him or her. When you're in the same family and share kinship ties with mother, father, children, aunts, uncles, cousins, etc., you're less inclined to harm them. You're more inclined to care for them, cooperate with them, provide for them, even self-sacrifice for them. You have this natural altruism and non-aggression to members of your larger kinship group in your community. Also, religion increases altruism. These things are all biologically based. These natural mechanisms we all have foster ordered human society. Not all animals have these mechanisms, which is why many species do not live together in groups. But humans can live in large ordered groups because of these natural instincts that maintain the fundamental relationships that generate social order from the bottom up. The problem with sexual liberation is it destroys these organic relationships. This is self-evident, especially given how the biggest advocates of sexual liberation historically, people like Shillamuth Firestone, Andrea Dworkin, Masha Gessen, have explicitly stated that their goal is to destroy marriage and family. But if there is any doubt about how sexual liberation is so corrosive to marriage and family, we can go deeper into the evidence in the open discussion. But the point is, when these relationships are gone, the natural tendencies that we have to be altruistic, to cooperate, to not harm others, all these biologically rooted tendencies are greatly diminished, if not completely lost. As a result, social order collapses, and the only way to have order is by imposing an increasingly totalitarian top-down system. This is what we have today. Without robust organic bonds, the only way to prevent society from exploding is to track everyone, monitor everyone's media consumption, censor people to prevent violence, closely regulate what is taught in schools, surveil everyone's finances, restrict access to weapons, even impose a social credit system. Here's a concrete example. Naturally, fathers have a strong bond with their children, a natural instinct to love, protect, and provide. Part of this affection is tied to the father's knowledge that his children are really his. If he's not certain that his children are biologically his because the mother has been cheating on him, then that affects his natural feelings for those children and his willingness to provide for them. This is found even in the animal kingdom when paternity is obscured due to promiscuous female behavior or even the possibility of promiscuous female behavior. This kills fatherly investment. But traditional cultures and religions prevent this by banning promiscuity. And the bonds of marriage and extended family pressure ensure that fathers provide for their kids. But today, sexual liberation destroys these organic mechanisms, directly harming children. Without these mechanisms, the top-down state must intervene by forcing fathers to provide child support. It does this by tracking fathers, forcefully taking funds from their bank accounts, throwing them in jail if they miss payments. This level of totalitarian control was not necessary in the past because organic relationships created the internal psychological and the external sociological conditions to all but guarantee paternal investment. Another example, single motherhood has shot up since the sexual revolution. Who is providing for millions of children living in these single mom households when mothers can't? In bottom-up societies without sexual liberation, it's the father, extended families, the larger kinship group. In liberated societies like the US and Europe, it's the welfare state. 90% of welfare in the US is given to single mothers. Where does the money for these programs come from? It comes from you and me as taxpayers. The government must create this massive bureaucratic system to surveil all our finances and then forcefully tax us in order to subsidize sexual liberty. This is how sexual liberty and totalitarianism are deeply linked. Another example. So much of our mental health depends on traditional marriage and extended families. This is how God created us, but even if you don't believe in creationism or God and instead believe we are a product of evolution, you must also believe that our psychologies were formed in the context of thousands of years of traditional marriage and family. If you suddenly pluck humans out of that context and throw them in a world of unprecedented sexual liberation, you would also expect unprecedented mental dysfunction. And that's exactly what we see. According to evolution, we didn't evolve the psychologies needed to live well-adjusted lives as sexually unrestricted, polyamorous, porn-addicted libertines. Who's going to ensure that this society of mentally dysfunctional people doesn't rip itself to shreds? You need a muscular, totalitarian surveillance state just to prevent mass upheaval. So this is the totalitarianism argument. The second argument is the chicken argument. Imagine a man who goes to the grocery store, buys a whole chicken, takes it home, has sex with it, cooks it, and eats it. Is this morally permissible? When Western college-educated people are asked this, they say they think it's weird, but it isn't immoral. But when you ask non-Westerners this, regardless of culture or religion, they find this highly immoral. Why the difference? Psychologists like Jonathan Haidt explain that we have different moral modules within the mind. One module is the care/harm module. This module makes us feel that harming others is wrong. Another module is the purity disgust module. This one makes us feel that things like smearing feces on someone or sex with a chicken is wrong. What Haidt and others argue is that Westerners, due to their culture and education, have a muted purity disgust module. This means that the care/harm module dominates their moral evaluations. This is why in the chicken example, Westerners feel icky about it, but they don't feel there's a moral objection because technically no one is harmed. As long as no one is harmed, there's no moral problem. This moral sense is codified by John Stuart Mill's harm principle, which has heavily influenced Western law and moral philosophy. All is permitted as long as you don't harm others. But for most humans, morality is more than just a calculation of harm. Disgust is also a big part of determining right and wrong. Sure, there's cultural diversity about disgust, but there are also universals. Humans universally find certain sexual behaviors viscerally disgusting. Humans also universally value innocence, purity, and sexual virtue. So I want to ask MrGirl and other fans of sexual liberation, do you believe that disgust and purity are morally valid? If not, then you should accept the full consequences of your stance. You should accept things like incest. If people are wearing condoms, there's no moral problem with parents, children, siblings all having sex, necrophilia, bestiality, the whole 9 yards. If you say disgust is not valid, you also have to admit that there's no problem with cannibalism, like eating dead relatives, with eating aborted fetuses, or how about pornography on every billboard, showing porn to preschoolers? Ultimately, you have to believe that a sexually liberated society with all these things is as good as a society without them. If you want sexual liberation, you have to be committed to going all the way. And if that weren't bad enough by itself, to make matters worse, none of us really knows what going all the way even means. Sexual liberation is like a dark, terrifying abyss. Once you jump in, you don't know where you'll end up, and there's no stopping the fall. Fans of sexual liberation might not be fazed by the perversions rampant today, but we ain't seen nothing yet. Now, I'm a Muslim. I maintain that sexual liberation is bad for religious reasons. I believe there's great wisdom in God prohibiting destructive sexual behaviors, and Islam is the best religion in terms of facilitating healthy sexuality. But the totalitarianism and chicken arguments are not religious. They're arguments that appeal to our common humanity. I'm looking forward to hearing Max's response.
You got it. Thank you very much for that opening statement from Daniel. And want to let you know, folks, if it's your first time here at Modern Day Debate, we are a neutral channel hosting debates on science, religion, and politics. We hope you feel welcome no matter what walk of life you are from. And with that, thanks so much, MrGirl. Thrilled to have you. That's right. MrGirl has deferred on his opening statement, saying that he prefers to have more open discussion. So we're jumping right into that open discussion. And thanks so much, gentlemen. The floor is all yours.
Okay, yeah, I have a couple of responses to some parts of that. One, I feel like you're framing it with a false dichotomy in that pointing out problems with modern Western society, like divorce or child, custody battles or child support payments. I don't think that is necessarily an argument in favor or against sexual liberation. I think those are problems too. And so I assume other liberal leaning people can imagine a society where you have sexual liberation and you can solve those problems, that you don't need fundamentalist religion to solve those problems. Another point I wanted to address was the disgust thing. I think disgust can be a consideration without being labeled as moral. So there are things that we don't want our neighbors to do because they're too disgusting. Even if we don't think we don't have to say they're immoral to say like, hey, don't do that. I think that was it. Oh yeah. I guess also just the idea that getting hounded for child support by a court is more totalitarian than what happens in majority Muslim countries or under Sharia law. If you break the rules, I don't agree with that either. I think I agree. There's I get what you're saying, that there's more of a need for tracking people because they're not already organized into families and marriages on their own. But I don't think they really are organized on their own. I still think that the iron fist of totalitarianism is a lot of what is keeping those marriages and families together.
You got it. And we'll jump into open discussion more formally. Also want to remind you folks, our guests are linked in the description. So if you'd like to hear more from either Daniel or MrGirl, you certainly can by clicking on their links below, as well as if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button as we have many more juicy debates coming up. And thanks so much, gentlemen. The floor is all yours for open dialogue.
So thanks, Max, for the response and for listening to all of the 10 minutes. No, it's kind of long, but I had a few questions. I wanted to address your points that you brought up in your response, but I thought it'd be good if you can define sexual liberation and like what exactly do you understand that to mean?
Okay. So I've read several of your articles, and I've seen your debate with Destiny and a couple your video about pornography. And I think one another of your videos. So my understanding is that under Sharia law, and you believe this, if two men are caught having sex, they can be executed. So that, to me, that is the like probably the epitome of not sexual liberation. So I guess sexual liberation for me is consenting adults can do whatever they want and think about or fantasize about whatever they want. And the government does not force you to have sex or provide sex. I don't know if this is a thing. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I assume that there is some wifely duty to provide sex for her husband under Sharia law. It's hard to describe what sexual liberation is. It's easier to describe what it isn't. So yeah,
So
I
mean,
think that's my working definition now.
So the thing is that, like in the opening, that if you have this kind of rule that as long as it's consenting adults doing what they want, that's going to lead to a lot of dysfunction. It's going to lead to psychological dysfunction, I claim, and there's a lot of research that will justify this. It will also lead to sociological problems like the collapse of marriage, this massive increase in single-parent households, massive decrease in or increase in divorce, which can be very traumatic for children, obviously. You have just a more individualistic, atomized society, and then that has to be addressed through more top-down measures, totalitarian control, where we live in essentially in a surveillance state because people don't have the same kind of organic, kindness, willingness to cooperate, willingness to avoid harming others, because they're not related to each other through like clear biological lineage and larger families. And so the totalitarianism is the result of the, what you described, consenting adults doing whatever they want. So this is a reason why we wouldn't want to have this kind of sexual liberation.
So you're saying some sort of top-down control is inevitable. So why not just use that top-down control to keep people in marriages and families rather than to... Well, do you concede that in your view that the society should push people or force people into heterosexual marriages, essentially? Like there's not really another option.
I think that heterosexuality, pair bonding, these are natural things. Like they emerge even without like a governmental force. And we should distinguish also between pre-modern governments versus the modern nation state, and especially the modern surveillance police state, because technology has allowed a level of control over people's lives that has never existed in the past. So yeah, in Islam, in Sharia, which I believe in and I promote, there are these kinds of governmental measures, right?
Yes.
Like,
So that's what I'm talking about. Do you
right.
concede that that is also totalitarian?
No, because it's something like you can have a system, like you can have a government that's not totalitarian. The government imposes, like every government will impose certain kinds of restrictions, whether we're talking about, Protestant kings or the Catholic Church or Chinese,
Sure.
Han Dynasty. Like there are always going to be some kind of
But like
government
if you
imposition. But it's not
stray,
necessarily totalitarian.
but if you have premarital sex or if you have gay sex or do these things that you are labeling as sexual liberation that destroy families and marriages, if you do, you're not allowed to do those things under Sharia law.
Yes, but I'm
Like
inviting you to think about. I'm inviting you and the audience to consider those restrictions on certain sexual behaviors and promiscuity as benefiting overall society because it maintains marriages and so forth.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I'm just trying to get you to concede that you're saying we won't need this top-down surveillance state because if you just use a top-down, more authoritarian approach earlier in the process before the marriage falls apart, then you can just kind of hold it together that way. But either
It's not
way,
top down. It's not top down. Like it's bottom up because this is something that's biological. Heterosexuality is biological.
well, you can still
Whereas,
force someone to do something that is biological. Like you could force someone to eat.
yeah, you can incentivize it. You can incentivize it.
Force
but-
some. You can put a machete to someone's neck and make them eat a sandwich, even if they're
mean,
hungry.
again,
You're
humans-
still forcing them to do it.
Again, humans naturally do this. You don't need a government. Like parents
Well, then
are.
why do you need Sharia law to tell people not to have premarital sex if they're naturally going to do that, or to tell women not to leave their husbands if they're like you're still telling people to do something in either case. And so I'm willing to concede to you that yeah, families break apart. We don't know whose kids are whose. Then we start to have to implement more surveillance measures, freezing bank accounts, all the stuff you said. That's true. But your proposed alternative also involves telling people what to do.
So I'm trying
You're literally arguing at sexual liberation. The opposite of liberation is authoritarianism or being told what to do, rules and laws.
So do you recognize that there's a difference between like humans do have a certain kind of normative or moral attitudes and instincts that they just have naturally. It's not something that an outside force has to impose. And the proof of this is when we look throughout world cultures, there are certain patterns and there are certain universality across cultures that it can't be socially constructed because how did all these independent cultures arrive at the same practices? Like, for example, valuing innocence, valuing purity, looking down and having this kind of negative attitude towards promiscuity, cheating in a marriage, or even the institution of marriage itself, which requires certain sexual exclusivity. Why do we see this throughout cultures? It's because there's a biological component. These things are universal, right?
It could be. But the question I'm asking you is, will you concede that Sharia law uses authoritarianism to hold family units and marriages together? And it sounds like you're saying no, you won't concede that. Okay, so
No,
I guess so we can move on from that point
because it's biological. I want you to also acknowledge like
you can force someone to do something that they're biologically inclined to do. You can force a hungry person to eat at gunpoint. It doesn't mean you're not forcing them.
you can. Let me just think about it. You can force a hungry person to eat. But you don't have to put a gun to the person's head. He will eat.
But you can.
I don't think you'd call that forcing it.
You wouldn't? You're saying so
No.
if I'm walking down the street and I see a hot guy and I think, oh, I would like to have sex with that man. Then he pulls out a gun and says, "Bend over." Am I not being raped?
No, that's
Even
a thought versus an action. You're the example you gave earlier was a person is eating a food.
No, I was already going to have sex with him. I already planned to have sex with him. So I'm walking over to him to say, "Hey, do you want to have sex?" And then just as I get there, he pulls out a gun and says, "Pull down your pants." Even if I want to do what I'm doing, I'm still being coerced.
I
So
think that even
I don't
even let's say I concede that, I still think that there's less force involved. There's less
that's fine.
force by Islam on
Okay.
people as opposed to the modern nation state in order to keep people. So I can concede this point that you're making about
Okay, so you're basically saying it's easier to nip it in the bud and just keep the family unit together rather than deal with the fallout of all the complicated, messy stuff that happens if you don't.
yeah, that has happened. Yeah, basically. What has happened
Okay.
in history.
Do you believe in the concept of a fake happy marriage? Like, do you think it's possible? So I understand that you don't think this is what is happening, but I think to your average, Westerner who believes in sexual liberation, we view those marriages held together by authority and coercion as fundamentally unhappy, even if the people in the marriage report being happy. We think that if a woman can't leave whenever she wants, that definitionally, that means it can't be a happy marriage because there's no way to know if she actually wants to be there.
So I think that people's individual like experience of happiness is an important consideration in figuring out what moral rules to follow. But there are other major considerations as well, such as maintaining these kinds of biologically rooted institutions of marriage and family, where sometimes you have rules that might limit personal choice or personal pursuit of individual desire or individual happiness in order to further these kinds of broader goals, which are, again, they're biologically rooted, and they ultimately lead to, if you want to make it a purely like utilitarian argument or consequentialist argument, you say ultimately it leads to more people who are happy.
Okay, so you will concede that without sexual liberation, women are individually possibly unhappier in their marriages, but that even the women in the society will be happier overall because the society will be better.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, look at this scenario. I can imagine a world where technology has advanced to such a degree that they can give you drugs where you like are constantly experiencing an orgasm, and compare the happiness level of people in that society, whereas as opposed to today's society or a society that is traditional or pre-modern religious society. I think those societies are preferable and better than the constant orgasm society where people are as the happiest that they can possibly be. Would you agree with that?
I agree that a society where people are constantly having an orgasm is worse.
Orgasm or like just bliss, like just
Yeah,
the
yeah,
maximum level of bliss that you can experience as an
yeah.
individual.
I wouldn't want that. That the Matrix society. Yeah, I wouldn't want that either.
Okay, so then it's just a matter of how far you're going to go and what things do you want to preserve that the
Well,
bliss society doesn't have.
but I don't think God is real. I think this is part of the disconnect here is that you believe God is good, and you believe God is the red pill. But
God, God pill.
right, and I think God is the blue pill. So
So,
I
but
think
tell me
I,
why
th- I
why don't you want the Matrix society actually? Like, what was the problem with it?
because it's not real, and because there's no struggle, there's nothing to do.
But
I
it's
find meaning
maximum happiness. Like, why do you need to do something? It's like you can do stuff.
happiness.
You can do stuff, but you're just in a constant state of euphoria. Like you can live however you want, but it's just a constant state of euphoria. You won't be necessarily motivated
But
to
it's the same. It's the same reason I'm not
interact with
religious.
people.
The same reason I'm not religious because I don't
What do you
believe in
mean
it.
by that?
I don't
No,
believe in it. I don't think
yeah,
it's. I
it's a
don't think
thought
it's.
experiment. It's a thought experiment to see,
Well,
like,
I know, but it would be
to understand.
the experiment would be, do I want to have bliss that is not connected to anything outside of my own delusion?
So you're acknowledging like there's an inherent value to
Yes.
reality.
Yes.
That is like it's not religious, but that is a metaphysical claim, right? That to say that reality has some value. Well, what is
No,
that value?
I'm not even saying it has a objective value. I'm saying I value it. And that's what same reason I don't drink or
Why?
do drugs.
Why?
I don't drink or do any drugs for this reason, because I don't want to feel feelings that are completely unconnected to essentially other people, or
But you see the analogy here, right? Like, I
yeah,
also am saying in my argument that marriage also has a value, and it's a value that transcends an individual's happiness or bliss.
yes, I
So do you see the
understand.
analogy?
Yes, I do see the analogy, but do
It's
you
not. I
see?
didn't bring God into it, right? A non-religious person could make the same argument.
Yes, but do you see my counter analogy in that a marriage that looks happy and feels happy, if it's held together by the woman being unable to leave, might not be real to me. If I'm looking at Shaylin, my girlfriend, we're looking in each other's eyes, and if I know in the back of my mind, you can't afford to leave, you won't have the support of the community if you leave, you could be punished physically if you leave and shunned forever and never have another shot. You might not be able to get a job in our society. All those
I,
things to me undermine the reality of the relationship. It makes it feel like it's not real. I don't know if you love me or if you're scared of them.
right.
I don't know if you're
So
having sex with me because you want to or because you have to.
no, like so. I think that you're trying to characterize like Islamic law. So there are a lot of details. It's not the case that a woman who is really not happy in her marriage, like she has no recourse. That's not true. She can leave, like under certain
Under,
circumstances.
okay, but what if I'm not in those certain circumstances? What if she's just not attracted to me anymore? Can she
She,
leave?
again, there are circumstances she can offer.
I need you to answer this. Can she
Yes,
leave
she can leave. Yes, she
if she
can. She can offer the dowry or
what and if
mahar.
and if I say no?
If you say no, then
Does she have a unilateral ability to just leave if she doesn't want to be with me anymore?
I'm of the position that that's not allowed in Sharia. Some have
I,
disagreed with me.
okay, so I just want to go with your position because I don't know anything about it. So I'm assuming I've heard you say before that you can't just leave because you feel like it, right? So if I'm with let's say Shaylin and I get married, she's my wife. I'm looking in her eyes. It could be that she doesn't want to be with me. She just doesn't feel like it anymore. And in your view, she can't. She can't leave. Also, I'm
Like
making this up.
girlfriend.
No, no, no.
If you're
We're
married.
so let's,
Okay.
let's say we're married. Yeah. Okay. Also, is she obligated to provide sex for me?
Yeah, she's obligated, and you're also obligated as her husband to provide shelter and food, like
Sure, sure.
regardless of whether you want to
I
or not. So
I
there are just
understand.
duties. Well, I just
A
want to make sure
wifely
the
duty.
audience understands like what
Okay.
we're talking about, right?
If she does not provide sex for me, am I at some point after chastising her for this, am I allowed to hit her for that?
Are you allowed to hit her if she refuses?
To have sex with
So
me?
like you can, after a certain point,
Yes.
you can't force her. You can't like grab her and attack her
But
and
I can slap her.
no, you can't.
What can I do?
You can't. You can
How am I
like
allowed to hit her?
you can for example spank her.
Okay, I can live with that. All right.
I mean,
So
have you watched American films where you see all kinds of depictions of spanking of women who act in a certain.
I have seen. I don't know if we're talking
way.
about the same films, but I have seen some depictions
No,
of
not.
spanking of women.
No, I'm talking
Yeah.
about classic Hollywood. I'm talking about look at what John Wayne does in some of his movies.
Yeah, yes. It's like that. I understand. Okay,
So
so
this is depicted in Hollywood.
Okay, so to tie together my reverse analogy,
Mm-hmm.
this sounds like a paradise for men. I can marry a woman, or a girl. I can marry if she has hit puberty. I can marry an 11-year-old. I can finally marry one of the cuties. She is obligated to provide sex for me. I can hit her or spank her if she does not. She can't leave because she feels like it. She has to provide a argument to some authority if she wants to leave. And you're saying you're not bringing God into it, but the laws that we're following are all said to have been written by a prophet or come from God. Mm-hmm. So to me, that's the blue pill. That's the paradise. That's the happiness. I can do whatever I want. I can have sex whenever I want, and I assume if I want to leave her that I can, right?
No, how is this like a paradise? Like you have to.
It's a paradise for men.
To get married. No, to get married, you are obligated to provide a dowry. You have to get approval of a family.
Yeah.
Her family to get married. You
I
have
understand
to.
Those are the.
No, you have
downside.
to. Yeah, these are. Well, you're not mentioning these. So you talked for a while. Let me respond to this kind of caricature that you've painted for your audience. Like all of these things that you find within Islam and Muslim societies, first of all, they're universal, by the way. Like these are universal values. Don't interrupt. Don't interrupt.
Before you start, will you acknowledge that everything I said would be allowed?
Yes.
And my last question.
Well,
can I leave her whenever I want? Is that true? Because I said that, but I don't know if it's true.
Leave her whenever you want.
If I don't,
yes,
if
you
I'm
can
not,
divorce. You can divorce.
I have unilateral right to just say I'm done with you with the blonde one. I'm done with the blonde one from Cuties. I'm done with you. I'm moving on.
Yeah, but you have a responsibility towards the children.
Okay,
you have to. You'd have custody of the children.
Okay.
And you'd be financially responsible for that.
Okay, so I'm not trying to say that you should agree with me. I'm more trying to provide you the Western liberal perspective of why what you're saying, that sounds like the Matrix society where everything is fake and everyone's lying about what's happening to provide men with euphoria.
How is this euphoric? Like I told you, you ignored all of the responsibilities that men have, all of the duties that you have. Look, like imagine you're a ditch digger and you have to go and every day from dawn till dusk, dig ditches. Why? You have no other choice because you're married. You have to provide for your wife, maybe wives, maybe you have multiple wives, your children, and you can't opt out of that. Like you can't opt out of that manual labor for the rest of your life. This is like paradise according to your definition. Like Islam obligates
all the cuties. I can marry all the cuties. Listen, let's go through your. I want to go through your.
No, you're interrupting me. Let me give you a counter argument. Like you've talked for a while now, so let me respond. So the thing is that these are duties on both sides, husband and wife, and duties require toil. They require work. So you can't just give this kind of feminist portrayal of what Islam is just a oppression of women and men are living in a paradise of pleasure. That's just that's an Orientalist depiction of what Islam is. Yes, you have certain rights and duties that are not the same for men and women because the genders are different. But there are there's parity to a certain extent between the amount of toil and responsibility and duties that each gender has. And this is not just Islam's conception of marriage. It's not just Islam's conception of family. You find a lot of parallels within Christianity, within Judaism, especially when you look at pre-modern, pre-Enlightenment religions. You find parallels in Hinduism and Buddhism. You find parallels in all of these pre-modern societies. It's only within the modern period where this kind, partly due to technology, where this kind of sexual liberation has proliferated. The kind of sexual liberation that you're advocating for would allow, for example, a husband, he knocks some woman up and he is able to just go and live his own life. He doesn't have a responsibility to provide for his children. He doesn't have a responsibility to provide for the person that he knocked up, because there's no commitment, there's no marriage that is tying him to the reproductive act. This leads to a kind of dystopia. Why? Because then that single mother is having to raise that child on her own. She depends on the welfare state to provide. And children who are born and who are raised in these single parent households, they are far more likely to suffer from mental disorders. They're more likely to drop out of school. They're more likely to get into drugs. They're more likely to fall into crime. They're more likely to be on antidepressants, to be alcoholics, and on and on and on. All of these kinds of social problems are on the rise because of single motherhood. And this is not like you can read Freakonomics. That was a best-selling book that talks about all of these problems that come from single parenthood. So this is the kind of world. And then what does the rest of society have to do? The rest of society has to pay tax money to this massive bureaucratic surveillance police state to manage all of the increase in crime, mental dysfunction, unemployment that is caused because of sexual liberation. That's like, just go and look up videos of Philadelphia, downtown Chicago, the slums of New York, and all of these major cities full of sexual liberation, by the way. But you have all of these social problems that are rotting away at modern civilization. And I don't know why you're not willing to acknowledge the link between sexual liberation and all of these social ills. This is a massive blue pill.
I'm happy to acknowledge the link between those two. My problem is that the alternative is worse. And so again, like, it's not that I as a feminist like seeing single mothers and people being poor and whatever other problems you're talking about. It's that I don't think that forcing women into what I view as essentially sex slavery is I think that's worse. I agree.
That's a straw man. Islam does not. First of all, Islam does not have this kind of idea that you're portraying as. But here's a question
I view it
for
as
you.
sex slavery.
Fine, put Islam aside. What is your solution to these problems? Is it cutting or limiting sexual liberty, or do you have some other solution?
Okay. I don't agree with your framing of them as problems. Is the thing. So, like, imagine a society that is even more restrictive and more fundamentalist than the one that you're than Sharia law. So let's say I start a religion where I'm like, you Muslims, you're the perverted weirdos. You are the sexually liberated ones. So I have a society where you have to wear like a special device that prevents you from thinking about sex unless you get permission, or like a device on your genitals that prevents them from getting aroused unless you get permission from like the elders and the tribe. And if you don't have this device, then the only reason you must be some kind of heathen or pervert. Basically, if you could lock down everything and force people to conform to religious law 100% without even being able to deviate in any way, I think at some point you would be like, well, some amount of freedom to be able to break the law, even if it's not good to break the law, even if you're going to be punished for it. We still need some sort of autonomy.
Yeah, I completely agree. My whole argument is against totalitarian control.
Yeah, so it's really about how much autonomy.
Like you have. No. I completely value autonomy. Islam values autonomy, but
I know, but
it can't be unrestricted, and that's why I'm asking you: what are the restrictions on autonomy? And you're not answering that question.
So like if women were chained up at all times, let's say women, let's say I make a new religion and I say women have to have a chain around their necks at all times. This holds families together. This prevents adultery. This prevents straying. Eventually the woman will even forget what the outside of the house looks like, so she's not going to leave. And if she wants to leave, like, blah blah. And no. If you make a special appeal, maybe we'll let you off your chain. But essentially, someone else is holding the key. I think you would agree that
Yeah, I
that
would.
would that,
But
that would be
doesn't
going that would be going too far. Okay,
that doesn't cause a problem for
let me-
my position though?
Just
That-
let me get through this.
Go ahead.
I'm not trying to cause a problem for your position. Your position is valid. I just don't like it. I'm trying to explain why I don't like it. I understand that your position is internally consistent. I'm not trying to attack it or say that even that you're wrong. I'm saying that it's a matter of preference, and I want to just explain why this is my preference, and I want to explain how you sound to me from my perspective. So imagine
Before you finish, can I just
Yeah.
say immediately with these thought experiments and examples
Yeah.
that you're giving, they're not tied to human biology. The restrictions that I mentioned do have a connection to human biology that are universal. That's a fundamental difference why these examples you're giving are disanalogous. Like people naturally want
That's
to
fine.
move around. You can't chain them and expect that to be functional.
Humans have been chaining each other up for a long time. Maybe there's not a biological imperative to put a chain around somebody else's neck, but maybe there is. I don't know. It happens across cultures.
Well, you characterize marriage as slavery. Like you characterize
That's
marriage
fine.
as like putting a chain around someone's neck. That's
I wanna-
completely disanalogous. Like marriage, pair bonding is something that is organic, biologically rooted. That's something that women want to do. Women want to be taken
But it's
care
also
of, to have a
something that-
husband
but you're
that
also
is
saying-
committed to them sexually. Like that's
also-
these are
you're saying-
biological realities.
You're saying that's something women want to do on a species level, but on an individual level, they might have to be forced. Sometimes.
No, Islam
Or
doesn't
restricted.
force. Islam doesn't
It-
force women
restricted.
to get married. Like if you want to
It
be
restricts
sexually
them from-
active, if you want to be sexually active in Islam, it has to be within a marriage. Because
But
if you
they're
don't do
obligated-
that, if
they're
you don't do
obligated by-
that,
they're obligated by religious law to provide sex, and sex is the most biologically reinforced behavior there is. But sometimes you have to force someone if you want to have sex with them. If you want to guarantee you're going to have sex with
you
them
have to
whenever
force
you want.
people. You have to force people to pay child support. You have to force people to.
Absolutely.
If
I'm
they
not
don't,
saying-
if they,
I'm
if
not
a
saying
mother
it's
doesn't
bad.
take care of her child, she has to be forced to do that.
I'm
Like,
responding
what's
to your
your
biological
point?
I'm responding to your biologically motivated argument by saying that even Sharia law tells people that they have to do things that they're very biologically motivated to do, like have sex. That sometimes
Yeah,
people
that's
don't
why
wa-
it's more
Okay,
rational. That's why it's more rational. It's
Okay.
it's
Okay, so-
getting people to do things. It's incentivizing behaviors that are biological. Like you as a person might not consciously realize
Mm-hmm.
why a certain way of life is going to make you happier, and so you might not choose it. You might not prefer that way of
sure.
life.
I agree with that.
So your own personal happiness actually
Needs to be
you're
set
actually
aside.
not. Yeah, it
Okay.
needs to be set aside, and that's the whole point of revelation. Like there's guidance
Yes,
from
but-
God who has created us, who sets
that's a
us
bit of-
a
that's
kind
a-
of
that's-
model for life. It's not a restrictive like we're going to chain your neck to a heater in a
But that's
basement or a dungeon.
It's a bit of a stretch to say that a behavior that does not make the individual happy, but is for the betterment of society, to still call that biologically motivated.
I did not say
don't-
that.
Okay.
Some people can be unhappy, but the majority of people will be happy. The majority of people in these kinds of marriages, as defined by Islam, will be happier than
They-
the kinds
they-
of marriages than the kind of marriages or casual relationships that exist in the sexually liberated West. I'll make that
But there's more
empirical
there's-
claim.
But there's more to life than happiness and bliss. And
No, I
pleasure.
know. So even that,
So they will be happier, but they will be less free. And anytime
yes.
you put me,
How's that
anytime
bad thing?
Anytime you put me at the, well, I'm telling you, this is my answer to the debate title is anytime I have to choose between happiness and freedom, I'm going to choose freedom. To me,
So you
me-
acknowledge that it's going to make It's going to make you personally unhappy. It potentially will make you unhappier. It
don't
potentially
know.
will destroy society. Like we're all going to basically become these atomized individuals, drug addicts who are
No, I don't
stuck,
know. I don't
in
agree
our
with that.
basements watching
I don't.
Netflix, whether
No.
it's like
I
cuties
don't.
or VR or whatever.
Yeah.
Like that's
Or
the
both.
kind of society, or both. That's the kind of society that there's a lot of freedom in that society. But I think most
Yes.
people would find that horrifying.
I don't know. But I want to walk you through my
You
analogy.
don't? No, but no, answer. Do you think most people would find that horrifying?
If most people find it horrifying, then we probably won't do it.
No, but
So
just like, do you think?
I think
Because I want to know
part of,
how in
I
touch
think
you are with how people around the world actually feel about this topic.
well, I think part of what what you're horrified by is that people aren't horrified. So I don't.
No, they are. The majority of people are horrified. It's like a very small segment of Western educated people who have this harm principle as the end all be all of morality because they've been indoctrinated basically to accept that as the the
Okay,
only thing that matters morally.
everybody's
Everyone
indoctrinated.
outside of
Everybody's
that.
indoctrinated
No, it's a small percentage. Like we can
with
talk in
something.
numbers.
Everybody's indoctrinated with something.
No,
Come
no,
on,
the
man.
things that I'm describing are natural. Like this is that's
No,
why they're universal. People
you
are
grew
born
up,
like
you
that.
grew up in Texas, but you think that it's okay for society to execute gay people if they have sex. You're indoctrinated, just like I am. We're just
It's not just
indoctrinated.
Muslim. Look at the majority of cultures and religions. You'll
Yeah,
find
I'm
people
saying
agree with that position.
The only
So how is
reason,
everyone indoctrinated except like a small minority?
no, I agree. I'm indoctrinated. I'm just saying you are too.
I can connect all of these kinds of
So can
values that you want to. No, you can't. You can't connect homosexuality to a natural instinct that people have. You can't connect like furries to a natural instinct that people have.
Why not? People play, people imitate, people see animals, they imitate animals, they dress up as animals, they want to have sex, so they have sex. That's a pretty easy one.
So bestiality, like you're saying, bestiality is natural. Like being attracted and turned on by animals is something natural to human beings.
You're saying that, and you think that cave people did never had sex with animals? Yeah,
I
I
don't know.
think it's
Stop changing the question. Answer the question. Like, do you think it's natural to be attracted to animals? Yes or no?
yes.
Yes. Okay. So that's there's no like mental dysfunction with being.
And mental dysfunctions can be naturally occurring. I don't agree that that means it's unnatural to have a mental dysfunction. Mental
So
dysfunctions occur in
bestiality.
nature.
What about necrophilia? Like, is that? So with the chicken example that I gave, you don't find any moral problem with it, obviously. But what about like?
I don't agree. I don't equate disgust to immorality, but I want to walk you through I want to explain this, and I'm not saying this to tell you that you're wrong. I'm saying this to tell you how you sound to me. I want you to picture that I start a new religion. And in my new religion, women have to have a chain around their neck at all times and have to remain in the home. You have to concede that this would remove all instances of adultery. It would force marriages to stay together as long as the man is satisfied. It would solve any remaining problems that fundamentalist societies have. Oh, and you mentioned Judaism and Christianity. I have nothing against Islam specifically. I lived in or worked in Beverly Hills for many years, and I was friends with a lot of Persian Jews there, and I was absolutely horrified by their society. Even in LA, I was constantly trying to sexually liberate them. I did my best.
They're pretty sexually liberated, right? I didn't understand what you mean by that. But anyway, continue with your example.
Not really. Yeah. Okay. Not to my liking. So in this super fundamentalist society, where we don't just tell people you have to follow the rules, we make them follow the rules, by whatever means are necessary. You can imagine your response to that being like, well, yeah, you're following the rules. There's no such thing as divorce anymore at all. Families are kept together. Everything is on paper perfect. but there's a level of oversight and force being used that I'm not comfortable with.
I'm not comfortable with it either.
Right. No, I'm saying that would be your reaction to that, to a super a society that basically enslaves its women literally and tells them you have to follow the rules. There's a point at which you and Muslims across the world and fundamentalist religious people across the world would be like, well, now you've gone too far. Yes, the rules are being followed, but it's too much. The people need a certain level of autonomy, and it's the same reason we don't put a limiter on your car to make it so you can't go over the speed limit. There's just a certain amount of freedom, even if we're going to punish people for exercising it, that we want to give people. So to me, while I agree that it would be nice if everybody were married in family units, I don't care if they're heterosexual marriages, but it would be nice if there were family units, that children always had parents, there was always food on the table, the father always cared about the children and felt that his life's duty is to toil for those children and provide food and shelter. And if women always wanted to have sex and were available for sex, I mean, yeah, all of that sounds great, but to the feminist, the metaphorical chain around the neck that provides that is unacceptable, and the expectations of men do not even it out.
So do you think that husbands being required to provide child support is slavery? Because sometimes it's 20 years of child support. How is that not slavery?
I think that when you have unprotected sex or try to have protected sex and fail, you have an obligation to the person that is born out of that.
So that is a restriction, right? That is
Yes.
a restriction of freedom.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, but you just said that if there's a situation where freedom is limited, you consider that essentially slavery. Because the kinds of restrictions I'm talking about within Islam or traditional, so Islam and traditional religion, they have laws, and these are the things that restrict personal freedom. But you're characterizing those as slavery.
Yep.
But these other things, like some formula that you gave, you consent to consensual sex. Therefore, where is that coming from? Why would we agree to that?
You can imagine a spectrum from there are no laws at all, and everybody can literally do whatever they want at all times with no repercussions, no government, total anarchy, to slavery.
We're both in between that. We're both in between.
Absolutely, I agree. I don't think it is literally slavery. I'm saying from where I want to be on the freedom oversight spectrum, what you're describing sounds like slavery for women and a paradise for men.
But I just explained how that's not the case. Like, you have all these obligations that men have. Remember the ditch digging, the poor guy who has to dig ditches. Like, that's the reality. Actually, for most of men in society, that was the reality. They couldn't sit in a nice, cushy, conditioned apartment and stream Twitch on Twitch, or me, have a YouTube channel and just live a cozy life. You have to actually go and toil. Sometimes you're conscripted into the army, and you'll literally have to die for your family and for your society. What is this amazing utopia for men that you're describing? I don't understand. And then
you
also
registered for the draft in the United States, so you can also be conscripted. And also,
as you pointed out yourself, what's your point with that?
That you're making claims about one culture that are the same in both cultures. You have to dig ditches there. If you're a ditch digger here, you have a kid and you get surveilled by the government and they decide that you have to pay child support, you've got to dig ditches here too.
Yeah, so how can you agree with those kinds of restrictions on men, like being required to pay child support, being required to provide, basically at threat of being thrown in prison if you miss the child support. You agree with that as that's not slavery, but then you have a problem with Islamic marriage requirements. And why are you focusing on that?
Because each of us has a line past which we say, you know what, that sounds like slavery to me. Okay,
Yeah,
and
but
your
I've
line.
explained why. Like the difference
I can
between
explain.
me
I
and
can
you,
explain. I can
the
explain
difference
why
between
too.
me and you is that I've pointed to how the kind of line that you've drawn leads to all kinds of societal dysfunction
Well, that's a
and
reverse
disaster,
engineer,
chaos, and totalitarianism. That's what your line
that's
leads to. That's the
backwards.
problem.
That's a backwards way of constructing your definition of slavery. My definition of slavery is based on how are people being treated, not what happens if we don't treat them that way. So from that perspective, both of us have a line that we won't cross, that you will acknowledge that there is a certain amount of authoritarianism and lack of autonomy that you're not comfortable with, even if it makes people follow the law. For me, that line is you can't have the government telling women that they have to have sex. You can't
What
have
government
the
says that? That's not in Islam. You're
you have to have
strawmanning
sex with you
Islam.
have to have sex with your husband.
You don't have to get married. If you get married, if
Yes,
you choose,
okay.
if you willingly choose to get
You're-
married, then there are obligations that come with that.
Okay,
But there's
just
no obligation in
listen,
Islam
you-
to get married.
I don't think we should be trying to convince each other to agree with each other's views. There's absolutely no way that you are going to come out of this conversation being any more like me, and I'm not going to come out of it being any more like
I'm
you.
not trying to convince you. I'm not.
Well,
trying
then
to
stop
convince you.
Stop arguing with me, and
No,
just hear. Just
I'm trying to respond to the things that you're actually saying.
I want you to understand that the distinction you're making between society, a government forcing women to have sex, or forcing women to have sex with their husband, or forcing them to have sex with their husbands, which to you think
you're fine with forcing husbands to provide child support.
Will you listen to me for a second?
Sure.
You're making a huge distinction between these two, as though they're going to strike me as very different. They're exactly the same. I have no emotional response. There's nothing different to me as being forced to have sex with your neighbor and being forced to have sex with your husband, because, as you pointed out, I am a liberal feminist. That's just how I think. So the government can force you to pay for kids that you've had. To me, yes, it's not slavery. The government can force you to have sex with your spouse. To me, is slavery. That's just where I draw the line, and I'm not going to be able.
Make sense.
It may not make sense. It may not make.
The psychological toll could be much worse. Like
it could be.
It's like
absolutely
you're appealing to you're appealing to something metaphysical without any kind of justification, rational, empirical, or otherwise. Like why is there a distinction here? Is it because of some kind of harm? Like the woman is more greatly harmed? Okay, it's not in terms of harm. So then what is the distinction between the husband being required to provide child support and all of those financial duties that he is that he has to
understand the question.
Versus, then what's the difference? What's the difference?
The difference is the same difference between the same way that necrophilia just horrifies you. Even if there were not a specific rule against it in the Quran, you would still not be in favor of people practicing necrophilia. Well, that's not true, because there is a victim when you're being raped by your husband.
You're a victim if you're being forced to pay child support. You're being raped because you're being raped by, you might have to go to a job where you're also being physically tasked.
I think we're just coming down to a fundamental belief that I believe that coerced or forced sex, even with your husband, is just an unacceptable thing to have happen in society. It's just rape, and I don't
you have a problem with how you're defining rape, but forced labor you're okay with. You're okay with forced labor.
I'm okay with debt, and I'm okay.
No,
with
it's forced labor.
Well,
you have to pay child support, otherwise you will be put in prison. So that's forced labor.
Again,
so that means you're forced slavery. You're pro-slavery then?
Are you trying to understand me?
Yeah, I am.
I don't think
I deeply want to understand how you make this distinction. You are fine with forced labor. I think that's called slavery. But you're not fine with
listen,
marriage, sex and marriage.
If you did not grow up in Texas, then I would believe what you're saying. But if you are making the claim that you don't understand, you literally don't understand why Americans, on average, have a different emotional reaction to being told you have to have sex with your husband versus you have to pay child support for your kids. If you are genuinely saying that you don't understand why I feel differently, and I can try to explain it to you, but not while you're like doing
No, explain
whatever
it.
it is you're
Explain it.
in America, legally and morally and ethically, you know, because you're an American, like it or not, you know that that is defined as rape.
Is it? I think it depends on the state. And I think it depends on
No,
new laws. I don't think that's historically been the case.
Historically, I think in like 1982, it became
Because you think
it became
that
illegal to rape your wife in the 80s.
so
You can be charged. You can be charged with rape for forcing your spouse to have sex.
What do you mean by force? Like force, does that mean like she just prefers not to? And
Are
she
you
says,
are you pretending that you're not American? Like I know that.
No, I just want to know the
I
history of the law. I just want to know the history because
I know
there's
we're on
definitions of consent. You're a feminist, right? So you understand how definitions of consent have evolved over American history, right? And the different waves of history. Waves of feminism.
I need you to stop pretending you don't understand American liberalism.
No, I understand it very well.
I know you do. So when you say, well, what's the difference between having to pay child support and having to fuck your husband but having to pay child support and having to have sex with your husband whenever he wants, you know the difference.
I know the difference in American law, but I'm trying to understand the moral basis for the difference.
You're saying you genuinely don't understand American psychology enough to understand why that just feels different to me?
So it doesn't really matter to me like how you personally feel about it, whether it's because of your cultural upbringing or your feminism or liberalism or whatever. I'm trying to analyze. I'm trying to analyze the underlying moral logic. That's what I'm trying to understand.
That's fine.
Max.
We can do. We can do that, but you have to first accept that this is how I feel. You know, this is how I feel. And you
I acknowledge
know
your feelings.
why.
Look, like me, with me, okay, I also at one point was a feminist. I also was very liberal, Harvard educated, going through American society. I would probably agree with many of your views, but then I was confronted with the fact that many of these liberal views are logically contradictory, or they are very idiosyncratic compared to the way that most people understand in the world, present and throughout history. Most people understand morality. So I was confronted with this, and I had to reflect, okay, maybe the way that I personally feel is not correct. Maybe I have to explore this and try to be self-critical to come to a rationally consistent position. So I went through that, and I think that's very healthy. Everyone,
you want me to go?
I'm sure you've gone. I'm sure you have gone through that. I'm sure you have gone through that.
I came out
with different issues. So I just want to have that kind of discussion about this particular issue.
Okay, so
2 minutes left till Q&A.
Okay, so in 1 minute, I don't agree with your kind of baseline argument that women need to be told what's best for them. I think that is anti-woman, anti-human.
Define woman.
XX.
Okay. That's not a got you for you, right?
Oh no, it's fine. I'm fine.
Yeah.
I'm fine. Or has a vagina or whatever. Okay. But I'm saying girls and women, as they hit puberty and become adults, I don't believe that for society's sake they need to be told what's best for them. They need to be told when they should have sex, who they should marry, or when they should not be able to leave the marriage or whatever else. I don't agree with that. I agree, and I don't even agree that they will be happier if you force them to. I think they will say they are happier because essentially there is a chain around their neck. And any sex that is had in that situation, I think is rape. And in a way, I'm saying that all sex in all fundamentalist religious societies even if it appears consensual in the moment, is to me rape. It's all rape, because I don't. Can women vote?
Okay, so
could women? Can,
that's
could
over
women
a
vote?
minute. That's over a minute. So the
My
thing
last
about
question is: Could women vote to change these rules?
so that's over a minute. The thing is that you recognize that within feminist theory, there are feminists who say that there is no such thing as consensual heterosexual sex. It's all rape because of the power disparity within society, in our patriarchal societies with men in power over women, that women cannot meaningfully consent to any kind of heterosexual behavior. And therefore, all heterosexual behavior within Western society today is considered rape. So it seems like your logic is along those lines. Anytime a man has sex with a woman would be considered rape under your the way that you've defined sexual liberation. So, I mean, there's another point that I want to make actually. Like, you believe, like, this is a separate from everything that we've discussed. Like, sexual liberation can be compared to like free market capitalism. Free market capitalism, I'm not a proponent of, I'm not a fan of. I think it leads to a lot of wealth disparity. It leads to a lot of injustice. And you have the 1% dominating all the wealth in the world at the expense of poverty for everyone else, basically, poverty and suffering. So free market capitalism, bad. But sexual liberation actually does the same thing, because you have certain percentage of the most attractive men who will monopolize sex with most women, people in the 1%, such as Max himself. So,
Well, yeah, I don't want to
Of
say
course.
anything.
right. So, but you would, I think that people who have this opposition to free market capitalism and prefer some kind of, whether we want to call it socialism or redistribution of wealth in order to increase equality, they should have, to be
A
consistent, they should
redistribution
have
of women.
not redistribution in sense of like, yeah, here's, prostitutes for everyone. That could be like a solution that the West might take up. But you could also impose like certain kinds of rules, like you have to be married, you have a limitation on the number of sexual partners because there's sexual exclusivity in marriage. Things like that is a type of redistribution of sex in society.
It's a redistribution of women as a commodity, but in a sexually liberated society,
No.
men are also a commodity. Sex is provided by both sexes. To the
Yeah,
women.
so I mean, isn't that a more just system, as opposed to the sexual liberation that you've been advocating?
No, because I still think it's all rape. But again, that's just my definition. I'm not saying you're like objectively wrong. It's just
You are saying that.
no. It's
And-
just I just see things differently from you. That's all. I'm not saying that your positions are not internally consistent. I believe that they are for the most part. I just don't like it, is what it comes down to. I just don't want it.
Okay, I can live with that as long as I'm being consistent and rational. But I mean, I can't return the statement, though. I don't think you're being consistent. I think that you didn't really distinguish how forced labor for men is somehow, which is essentially slavery, is somehow bad for men.
Would you rather be forced to dig a ditch or to have sex with somebody you don't want to have sex with?
No, if I marry someone,
And
I
then you no
recognize
longer
that
want- and you- and
just
then
like
you no
any
longer-
kind of
and then
contract,
you-
like
and
I
then
make
you-
a contract with you to mow your lawn every week. And then some days I just don't want to mow your lawn, but the contract is there. If I don't meet the contract,
so in the
you can sue
hypothetical-
me, and if I don't pay up, I can be put in prison. And if I don't,
Okay,
if I
so
refuse
in
to
the-
comply
in
with
the
police, I can be
hypothetical-
shot dead. So
the
I'm
hypothetical-
being forced to abide by
I
the
get what you're
contract that I
saying.
make. No,
I
you
hear
keep
you.
interrupting me. Like, let me finish my point.
Because you're changing the subject. In the
I'll
hypothetical,
never let you guys get into this topic.
you've signed two contracts. One is a marriage contract, and one is a mowing the lawn contract. Do you want to, if you had a get out of jail card for one of them, so you can either spend a year mowing a lawn you don't want to mow, or you can spend a year having sex with somebody every night that you don't want to have sex with anymore. You find them unattractive, you hate them. Which contract would you rather get out of?
I mean, I'd have to think about it, but they're both coercive. That's my point.
I'm saying, would you rather do coerced labor or coerced sex? Which do you think would impact you more negatively?
I think that it would be the coerced labor.
Okay.
We can jump into the Q&A. Do want to say, folks, our guests are linked in the description. We highly encourage you. You can hear plenty more where that came from, as we really do appreciate our guests. And that includes at the podcast. We put our guest links in the description box there, too, if you're listening via podcast. This one coming in from Orthodox Chad. Thanks for your question. Says, I'm an Orthodox Christian, but Daniel looks like a Chad right now. And Can Fight says, why is Daniel against the welfare state when one of the pillars of Islam is zakat, let me know if I pronounce this right, or almsgiving? Shouldn't he support giving to the needy?
Yeah, I absolutely support giving to the needy. It's something that is required within Islam. But that's not equivalent to the welfare state. Like when you take zakat, for example, it's not an income tax. You have to pay 2.5% of your excess wealth. So like if you have $100,000 in your bank account, then you pay 2.5% of that after a year. Like it's money after your expenses. So it's like a wealth tax in a way. And that goes straight to the needy and the poor and the orphans, as opposed to being taxed 40% of your income or even more in certain socialist states. I think that is a more totalitarian and a more coercive, all-encompassing kind of tax on people compared to zakat. So it's not an either or issue.
This one coming in from 20 Faces. This is for you, Mr. Girl. They say, what is our sexuality meant to be liberated from? And what are the boundaries of this liberation? Just the harm principle?
From Daniel Haqiqatjou. What is it meant to be liberated from? Yeah, just authoritarianism and government overreach into the bedroom.
Gotcha. Man, this one coming in from Anomic. Anomic says, Mr. Girl, do you think, quote, do what thou wilt is a good standard? Any idea who came up with that idea? And then said, Daniel, I'm no Muslim, but as a Catholic, I'd rather, said I find you persuasive.
No, I don't think it's a good standard. I think there needs to be more nuance there. As I said, that I think it's a bit of a straw man to say that if you're against slapping a woman who won't have sex with her husband and that being okay, then surely you're okay with bestiality and necrophilia. So spanking a woman because she won't have sex with you, and basically coercing her into sex, and she's not allowed to leave and she's not allowed to vote and all this other stuff. To say that must mean that I'm okay with necrophilia and bestiality and incest is preposterous. There is a big gray area in between those two. And
but why?
And I understand you're making the slippery slope argument. I just think you're wrong.
I should also just add, we can respond to answers, right? So Islam also forces men to have sex with their wives, right?
Because, but the men can unilaterally leave.
No, they can't leave because
marriage.
They can, but it's more complicated because
if
they leave the marriage, they have to pay another dowry, and if they can't afford another dowry, then they will not be able to access sex at all. So It is a coerced situation where they have to have a certain amount of sex with their wives, and their wives can demand it, and if they don't provide it, the woman can divorce the husband. So it's actually a two-way street.
This one coming in from Anomic as well says, just doing it because it feels good isn't true in any context. Eating, even exercising out of moderation, or I think they mean beyond moderation, is harmful. Is sex immune from this?
No, you can get addicted to sex just like anything else. No, I agree with Daniel here that if your use of sex or pornography is, it can of course get obsessive to the point where it's disrupting your life.
You got it. This one coming in from Chris G. Thanks for your question. Says, you say sexual liberation is harmful. Repressing your sexuality can be remarkably dangerous and harmful, Daniel. Suicide rates show this. No middle ground?
No, I agree that, and I said it throughout the debate, that Islam promotes healthy sexuality. You're not supposed to repress your sexuality, but it has to be channeled through marriage, because unrestrained sexuality leads to a lot of spiritual problems, blackens the soul, etc. But putting those religious arguments aside, it also creates all kinds of havoc within society. So I'm not like a Victorian Christian, like in the sense that or even Christians, I think generally believe that even within marriage, the sex act is something that is, less than ideal or dirty, or filthy. But in Islam, that's not the case. Sex is seen as a beautiful thing when it's done between a husband and wife within marriage, and it's something that is actually rewarded by God in the afterlife. Having sex with your spouse is rewarded as a good deed in Islam. So I think that's a big stereotype that people might have about Islam, that somehow we're against sex. No, sex is healthy, it's important, but it needs to be channeled in the right way. And in fact, the argument that I made at the end of the open discussion was that there is more repression of healthy sexuality when you sexually liberate people, because again, you have this monopoly by a very small percentage of society, males in society, that are dominating the sexual marketplace. And sexual liberation is leading to less sex for people than comparative traditional society. So this is actually another major argument against sexual liberation.
A asks, for you, MrGirl, why is freedom more valuable on an atheistic paradigm than happiness?
Maybe it's better to differentiate between happiness and pleasure, and say that I think a more long-term, kind of what Daniel's alluding to, a long-term happiness encompasses some amount of struggle and work, and that getting everything you want at the moment you want it is more akin to pleasure. And there's a place for that, but being in a jail where you are forced to feel good 24 hours a day also sounds like a kind of hell to me.
You got it. This one coming in from Louis Preciado says, please be sure to smash the like button. Thanks for your support, Louis. And Anomic, thanks for your support as well. Says, and then they asked a question too. They said, if my kids can't, I think they're trying to basically give a parody argument. I can't remember who made this argument though. So they said, if my kids can't voluntarily leave my household, I can't know if they really love me. And so was there a way, do either of you, is it registered?
Yeah. I think that's a challenge to me. No, you can't know if they really love you. You'll find out how your kids feel about you when they're financially independent from you, just like my parents did.
You got it. This one from Joe Schwartz says, what is your favorite video game? Are you guys play
Yeah.
more contemporary stuff or old school?
Old school. So I grew up playing in like the regular NES system, and played Super Nintendo at one point, or I had a Super Nintendo rather. I liked to play Donkey Kong Country, those types of games. But then as an adult, I liked StarCraft 2, and Age of Empires 2. So, but I'm not like a gamer. I don't like spend much time, but I do enjoy those games.
Nice. Mr.
The Last of Us.
Nice. Well, thank you very much. This one, Zagros Ozcan says, actually, even if he is conscripted, he can present religious reasons and get out of fighting. They instead give you some of the field menial job.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's directed towards me, but like, do we consider it slavery that in Islam, for example, men are required to defend the nation or society through war and through, military service? Do we consider that slavery? Like, did men come up with this idea to like harm women by requiring themselves to go fight in war and die and become like the majority of casualties in war between societies. Like this idea that Islam is just created to prefer the interests or the pleasure of men, I think this is not founded when we consider things like required military service of men, not women, within Islam.
I would rebut that I still think that fundamentalist religion is the ultimate blue pill, that you get to own women essentially and girls if that's what you're interested in. They have to have sex with you. You can spank them if they don't, and they can't leave. And then you believe that you are being encouraged to do this and rewarded by an all-powerful being that I don't believe exists, and that you will go to a paradise where you will experience infinite bliss, which I also don't believe exists.
This one coming in from Joe Schwartz. Interesting one. They say, Daniel, what's your favorite thing about liberalism? MrGirl, what is your favorite thing about Islam?
My favorite thing is, I mean, I wouldn't say it's my favorite thing about liberalism. I guess it is technically about liberalism because I think liberty and equality are important values. I do value autonomy, personal choice, and those things are found in Islam. So I do think that there's overlap between Islam and liberalism. It's just that liberalism goes too far and says that it's all about freedom and equality, and that ends up destroying human society. So that's essentially my critique of liberalism.
My critique of no, my favorite thing about Islam is probably people waking up thinking about what good they can do for themselves or their communities or the human race. I don't think that enough people in liberal societies shoulder that duty or burden.
You got it. This one from Anomic as well. It says, MrGirl, is MGTOW? Are you one of the men going their own way? I didn't know that.
No.
Okay.
I don't know what I said that made them say that. My views about like I'm pretty much a gender abolitionist for the most part. So you asked earlier. My definition of women and men are like either defined by genitals or chromosomes, something simple and identifiable that we all use in day-to-day life. But I don't believe that men and women should have separate bathrooms or separate locker rooms. I do think they should have separate sports teams, but generally, I want us to move toward treating everybody the same.
You got it. And they also said, I don't understand this. They say no difference between a neighbor and a husband to a woman. You guys know what they're getting at there?
I said being forced to have sex with your husband to me is akin to being forced to have sex with your neighbor, meaning that consent should be continuous, and that you cannot consent to sex 10 years in advance. You can't even consent to sex 10 minutes in advance, or 10 seconds in advance. So that just because you sign a contract saying you're going to have sex with somebody, if you enforce that contract, it is the same amount of rape as if you tell a woman that she has to have sex with somebody she's not ever been sexually interested in.
Gotcha. And Zoe, thanks for your question, says, Daniel, can Muslim women discipline men, such as spanking, if they don't provide enough sex?
No, they cannot. It's like a one-way street. But if the husband is not providing adequate sex, then this is a legitimate claim that she can take to authorities, and the authority can rule in her favor that her husband is not providing her with what she's required, and the judge can issue a divorce. And the man has to comply with that kind of separation decreed by the judge. And if he doesn't, then essentially the police can come and forcefully beat the husband if he doesn't, comply with the judge's order. They can imprison him. So the husband is also subject to violence if he refuses to comply in that scenario.
You got it. And thank you very much for your question. This one coming in from Xavier Relish. Somewhat reminding me of what came up earlier. They said women have all the advantages in the dating market. If you are an average woman, you can essentially get intimacy whenever you want, while men have to generally struggle. How is this healthy for society, Mr. Girl?
Well, that's a sort of mathematically nonsensical because every time a woman has sex with a man has sex with a woman. So it's more like the every time a man and a woman have sex, the man has to probably spend more time talking to different women or talking to that one woman or whatever, and the woman could get away with spending probably 5 minutes looking for sex, but it still comes out to 1 to 1. And then if you think of the time women spend preening or the time women spend just doing dumb woman stuff that is expected of them, it could average out to much more time that I can roll out of bed, not shower, and go out and still have a good shot at getting laid, whereas a woman may feel that she has to spend 2 hours getting ready. So I don't quite agree with that formulation.
But it's not 1 to 1 because it's the same guys who are having multiple female partners. Like this is the whole Chad phenomenon. Like the Chads, the big strong guys with the chiseled good looks, they're able to have a lot of female partners, but that leaves the majority of men without any partner, without any sexual access. Like this is the whole Tinder phenomenon also.
Okay. So
a woman on Tinder can easily match, but a man on Tinder, it has much less of a chance. He might never match with a female.
Well, okay. So yeah, I guess you're talking about the median and I'm talking about the mean. Do we have any statistics on how many men are virgins versus women, or how often men are, I guess median statistics?
Generally it's like an 80-20 rule. Like 20%
of
men are with the 80%. It's like the...
No offense, but I think you're insane. So I need you to provide some sort of source if you're going to say this, because I think your worldview is absolutely crazy.
But do you agree with it conceptually that this is happening?
I don't know. I honestly don't know. I know that I know that men feel like it's happening. I don't know if it actually is.
But the source of this is all the biological studies on hypergamy. Mm-hmm. So women have this preference to mate with those who are higher than them in social standing and in wealth. So that creates this automatic.
I understand
dichotomy.
the theory. I want some statistics to tell me what the disparity is actually like, and is it different in different cultures? And then I would be much better suited to answer the question.
Yeah, I have to pull it up.
My answer is to go to the gym.
Yeah, I mean, this is what incels are all about. Like I thought you were more familiar with incel culture.
No,
it's not just about going to the gym.
I also think incels are crazy. So I think their feelings are valid, and that there are reasons they feel what they feel, and I understand they hate women and why they hate women, and I kind of hate women too. But I also think that they're a bit overly pessimistic, and that they probably have some personal problems that they're projecting onto, as we all are, onto their kind of political views of the world.
I think that it's a structural problem with sexual liberation that causes this massive increase in men not being able to find partners. I think
that men have never...
They're not going to the gym enough.
I think it is because they're not going to the gym. I think men have never, historically, have not had to, because they have all the power, they have the food, they have the money, and they make the laws and they enforce the laws. They haven't really had to make themselves sexy. And now you do. Now it's not good enough to just be a guy and say, I'm a guy, why can't I have sex? You have to market yourself.
But there are guys who just naturally are better looking, right? More attractive, more athletic.
Sure, but there's things you can do.
So they're gonna monopolize.
There's things you can do to make yourself more attractive. Eventually, because those guys don't want to marry the women either. So eventually, the ladies will become available, even in your hypergamy nightmare.
Usually, to say the least. This one coming in from Tails says, Iceland and Norway are the safest countries on earth with the most attractive people, despite being sexually liberal.
So I think that within those societies, violence is not the only metric, of societal health. There's also all like look at just the tax rate. Actually, I take that back. I'm not going to concede that Iceland and Norway are not violent. They're extremely violent because the tax rate is so high. The government has to force you to give up like 75% of your income and your wealth to provide for this massive socialist state that takes care of all of the children that are not being brought up within healthy families with marriages. So actually, Iceland and Norway, all of the Scandinavian countries, all of the Western European countries, they confirm, my fundamental thesis that you have to have more totalitarianism, more social control, more surveillance, tax people at a higher rate to subsidize the sexual liberation and the breakdown of marriage and traditional family. I think those are great examples for my point.
Juicy. This is these are like some of the more fun questions ever. This one coming in from Extra Delight says sexual liberation from the state, family, and religion. More of a statement in that case. But CJ Canton, thanks for your question. I didn't see it attached. Let me know. Actually, here it is.
I have some stats. Whenever
you got it. Going back, we'll give you a chance if you want to talk about that because it's an interesting question. It was one of my favorite questions we've gotten in a while.
Go ahead.
Go ahead for if you do want to talk about the stats you found.
I'm still scrolling to find like a
got it.
Exact number. You get asked the questions, please, James.
You bet.
I'll get it.
CJ Canton says for Daniel, left out is a quote malakat amanicum unquote or sexual slavery, which is allowed by traditional Sharia. Daniel is not correct. Said he's okay with this slavery and puts no value on freedom. You've got a critic out there, Daniel.
Oh, I'm surprised I have a critic. But so if you go to my other debates or my channel, I have a lot of information on this practice of concubinage, or if you want to call it sex slavery. You can also read books like War Before Civilization from Lawrence Keeley. And so he explains that in pre-modern times, war was primarily about manpower. Basically, the side that had the biggest army is going to win in wars. And of course, if you lose in a war, you're potentially going to be completely wiped out. So the most valuable thing when manpower is the deciding factor is wombs, basically, is wombs to be able to produce children who will grow up to be warriors and fight in these wars. So literally the existence of your civilization, your society, your people depends on the number of wombs that you have. And that means that the societies that actually took slaves, sex slaves or concubines, those were the societies that survived. Concubinage was essentially a weapon of war, and obviously it's not a good thing. War is not a good thing. Slavery is not a good thing, but in that historical circumstance, it was something that was required. It was morally required. Otherwise, you are going to be wiped out. And this is why all pre-modern civilizations had this practice. I would argue that in Islam, there are a lot of rights given to sex slaves. They couldn't be prostituted. They couldn't be, killed or maimed or, abused in this physically harmful kind of way. They were given a lot of rights in the sense that their owner could not prostitute them and would have to take care of them, provide for them in terms of food, shelter, clothing, and any children that came out of that relationship would be free, and eventually the mother would be freed as well. So Islam provided a kind of holistic system to integrate these women who are from the losing side into Islamic society. So war is inevitable with all societies. this was a practice that we find throughout pre-modern society.
You got it. Thank you very much for your question. Saswage Lord says, "Hey Daniel, cool beard and turban. MrGirl, can you invite Daniel for a regular interview on your channel?"
Oh, you're saying like not a debate?
I think that's
I don't like to make plans for future streams on stream, but I'm open to DMing with Daniel in the future and discussing this. Yeah.
You got it. And Rugal Migdal says, "MrGirl is a cool guy. Thumbs up." Saswage Lord strikes again. Says, "Now I don't understand. Hopefully this is an inside joke. Of some dark type of inside joke. They say MrGirl has hit a woman and Daniel is okay with chaining women. Maybe you two can find some common ground."
I didn't know this is not it's not really I mean it's true. That's why it's funny. But I made a video called "How I Learned to Stop Hitting Women" about my past abusive relationships and kind of reflecting on a way for people in abusive dynamics to climb out, or at least providing my train of thought of how I got out of that.
That was a really dark joke. Mango T, thanks for your question. Says, "Dan, why did Daniel, why did Muhammad tell child wife?" Let's see. I don't know if this is related to the question or to the topic. I do want to keep it to the topic because that's what the debaters have prepared for. So Mango T, let's see. Rugal Migdal says hypergamy in all caps, and namely that word that came up before, namely the idea that Daniel brought up.
You've got hypergamy and then polygamy. I still think that yeah.
I have the stat here.
Fundamentalist religion is the wonderland for men, where they can have as many women as they want, and then liberated sexuality is much harder, and you have to compete.
Here's the stat about hypergamy.
Okay.
So I can share the link at one point, but I'll read the relevant part. As stated previously, the average female likes 12% of men on Tinder. This doesn't mean, though, that most males will get liked back by those 12% of all the women they like on Tinder. This would only be the case if likes were equally distributed. In reality, the bottom 80% of men are fighting over the bottom 22% of women, and the top 78% of women are fighting over the top 20% of men. We can see this trend in figure 1. The area in blue represents the situations where women are more likely to like the men. The area in pink represents the situations where men are more likely to like women. The curve doesn't go down linearly, but instead drops quickly after the top 20% of men, blah, blah, blah. So that's...
Wait,
it
so
is
the top
like
20% of the top 20% of men are getting likes from the top 80% of women? And the top 20% of women are getting likes from what?
No. The top 20% of men are getting likes from the 80%, right?
And
but the bottom 80% of men are competing for basically the bottom 20% of the women. So like if you ranked all the men and women on Tinder, from the best, most desirable to the least desirable.
You're basically saying there's 80% of the women can easily get likes, and only 20% of the men can easily get likes.
Yeah, 20% of the men, yeah. And the thing is that when you have sexual liberation, that 20% can have sex with as many from the 80% of women that like them as they want, but then there's nothing left for the 80% of the rest of men.
Yeah, I guess I just think that's it is any inequality, but I think that's one that needs to be solved by making men more sexually objectified and making them better at presenting themselves, and just being like healthier and more attractive. Yeah, go to therapy, go to the gym.
They're much healthier than the women. Actually, the women are the ones that they can use some exercise as well, I think.
Sure. Women should also go to the gym, and I agree with that. I think that we should push society towards where, if you're a woman, you should have to have a little muscle on you to compete. I agree with that too.
Juicy to say the least. What is it that community talks about? Chad Thunder Rooster or whatever. April Cox, thanks for your question. Says, Daniel, is gay sex worse than sex with? Let's see. So I'll let this. Is this related to this topic?
It is absolutely.
Fair
We need to
enough.
hear it. We need to hear it now.
I kicked the other one out. So this is, they said, Daniel, is gay sex worse than sex with a 9-year-old?
Yeah, so like, we can talk about child marriage. We can talk about homosexuality. This is like combining both of these issues. So definitely, this is a longer discussion that you can find videos on my channel related to them. We can go to the child.
The short
marriage
answer is yes.
No, yeah, it's obviously yes, but
Okay.
I need to be able to explain.
You want to
it.
give context, of course.
Yeah. So in low technology societies historically, 99% of human history basically, child labor was essential. Children would work in fields to produce food to survive. People needed child labor to survive, and there was no schooling, and it was over 90% illiteracy. It was only a very small elite that was educated or schooled in any sense. There was no such thing as career for the overwhelming majority. Rather, but for the modern age, a career is not low-skilled food production in agriculture or hunting and gathering, but rather a period of extended schooling to be like a professional or a doctor, lawyer, etc. So boys and girls were marrying early. There's no need for schooling, and it wasn't ruining their schooling because there was no schooling to get married early. Like, the idea of a career was nonsensical. Like, there was no such thing for most of human history. So these were illiterate societies, and usually the offense that people have regarding girls marrying, or even boys marrying at age 9, 10, 11, 12 is because they're ruining their schooling, or they're being robbed of the opportunity for career, etc. But these haven't existed for the majority of human history. Rather, bearing children, being a part of a family, being a loving mother, that was really what was essential. So there was no real reason to delay a female from getting married. And that's why we see this kind of marriage in literally every pre-modern society. It was not seen as a sexual dysfunction or a perversion. And girls can reach puberty by 9 years old. It's called precocious puberty. There's a lot of biological data on this. So there's nothing really that is morally wrong with this practice as it's practiced even today in many different societies. It's not a source of psychological dysfunction or physical dysfunction. And I think a lot of the Western psychological literature also supports this kind of practice. I'm sure, MrGirl, you've talked to different pedophiles, for example, and you've interviewed them, but you're familiar with the idea of hebephilia. So hebephilia...
I've heard the term, yeah.
Yeah, so that's not considered a psychological dysfunction because such a large proportion of even Western men that are interviewed or that are given these surveys, and they're kind of hooked up to different sensory devices, show that a large proportion of them are sexually attracted or can be aroused by images of girls in their early teens, or even as young as like 10 years old. So within the literature, like, you can go read the research paper by Bruce Rind. He says that this is actually an evolutionarily adaptive thing to be attracted to females at this age, because it maximizes the fertility window. Women don't have infinite fertility. They are only fertile for a few decades. And in order to maximize that required early marriage. And this is what is found in all societies, according to Bruce Rind, because it's evolutionarily adaptive. So it cannot be a psychological dysfunction. It is just a modern social taboo.
I feel like I should say something. I agree with the evidence that you are talking about. I don't agree with your conclusion. So I agree that adults can be attracted to pubescent, prepubescent, whatever children or around that age, and in the right circumstances, more can be aroused than by that than we would like to admit. It is a taboo. However, I don't believe that just because it is occurring biologically or naturally or whatever, that means it is moral. I think that the age of consent should be 17. I think that murder could be a biologically selected for trait. That doesn't mean that we're not going to define it as a mental illness. So I agree that these feelings, latent or active, are more common than we would like to admit, and that it is a taboo to even talk about it. But I think that the thoughts and feelings need to be separated from the action. So I guess this is one area where I am less sexually liberated than you. I think that just because people want it doesn't make it right, and I think it is rape. I think the age of consent should be 17. As
so, are you against, like, what's the minimum age for a child to be sexually active with someone his or her own age? Like 2 8-year-olds, 2 9-year-olds, like, what's the minimum?
I think some amount of experimentation is inevitable. And
but what's moral? What's morally acceptable?
I think some amount of privacy provided to children when they're playing or hanging out for brief periods is also desirable. But I do think that not too much privacy. I think kids should generally be checked on, and if they're having sex, they should probably be stopped, not shamed, but just say, "Hey, we can talk about this." But I don't think it is ethical.
9, 8.
Well, hear me out. I don't think it's ethical for a parent or guardian to knowingly provide a space for children to have sex in, or minors to have sex in, below the age of probably 15. I think if you think the kids are making out, I would say 13. If you think that they actually have the space and time and means to actually have sex, and you're letting them do this at age 13, I think that's unethical and that it should be stopped. I don't think exactly it should be criminalized, but maybe it should.
So these are just based on your feelings, but what are the feelings based on? Like, you're not giving like a morally based argument.
I think it's based on my experience, probably. When I was
so my argument was based on like biological data, psychological data, and the actual historical practices. So I'm trying to understand, like, you have certain taboos.
Well, to a feminist, history is not a argument. Most of history is horrifying, and even to you, most of human history is like 300,000 years of nasty, brutish, and short. So I don't. That the appeal to historical practices doesn't resonate with me.
Yeah, but so then what does resonate with you? Like,
I don't
what
know.
about access to pornography? Like, they're teaching now, like, proponents of sexual liberation are advocating teaching kindergartners how to masturbate and how to consume pornography responsibly. Do you agree with that? Like, should kindergartners?
I would need to see a source for people talking about advocating for kindergartners to consume porn responsibly. I did see your article about that tweet, but that woman deleted that tweet probably half an hour after she made it. So I'm not going to count that as a deleted tweet by somebody who got dogpiled by absolutely everybody. I'm not going to count that as a common sentiment in liberal society. I will say that my girlfriend asked me to have sex when I was 13. We were naked, and I literally had a condom in my nightstand, and I said, no, we're too young. So I somewhere along the way, either through experience or through what I was taught, I have always felt like it's not something that a 13-year-old can really reasonably psychologically handle.
This one coming in from, do appreciate your question. Mark says, MrGirl, what was the whole thing about finally being able to marry a cutie?
Oh, I don't know if you're familiar, but my rise to whatever prominence I have now was fueled by my controversial review of the movie Cuties, in which I self-deprecatingly acknowledged that I found the cuties attractive, despite thinking that it is unethical to make a movie about 11-year-old girls twerking. I said some controversial things about adults being able to be attracted to minors in certain situations. I was making a joke saying that under Sharia law, I could finally live out my fantasy of marrying the blonde one from Cuties, but I don't actually want to do that. That was a joke.
You got it. Yeah. Just remember. The only reason I'm not laughing, I'm not because I am bummed at your misfortune. I don't take any joy in it. But I'm also wondering, I'm like, ooh, did I accidentally break the Twitch TOS tonight? Am I accidentally helping you evade any sort of recent ban?
Yes.
Okay. Oh well. Well, that's all right. We always like playing it close to the heart. So Mango,
I sorry, I didn't know you were streaming on Twitch. We're all moving from Twitch to YouTube though.
Yeah.
who's we're all?
Everybody. Twitch is gonna get rid of all politics eventually.
Wait, you're streaming to Twitch right now?
No, no,
Max?
no. No,
He's not.
I'm banned from Twitch.
But
No,
I'm
no. But he's streaming to Twitch.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's not a huge crowd watch.
Yeah,
But-
I mean, I think with Destiny, I think everybody's going to have to eventually switch over to YouTube.
It's time. I hate to say it, especially because some people are watching on Twitch right now. We love that you're watching on Twitch right now. The 11 of you who are, but I think YouTube is the future. Now, Max, you think that? Do I understand? So, you're saying that this looks like?
You should probably delete your VOD though after this. But sorry, what were you gonna say? Yeah, I think YouTube is much more hospitable to I'll be able to monetize the video I got banned for on Twitch. YouTube let me monetize, so they're much more accepting of controversial discussion or adult discussion. But yeah, my chat is freaking out, telling you to stop your stream and delete your VOD.
We like to live
as you wish
over here, but I have to ask. I appreciate your chat doing that though. That I do. We'll definitely erase the VOD. And you say that everybody's moving over. So I'm curious. If you forgive me for jumping in, you guys. I can't help but be curious because I'm always looking at Twitch and YouTube, and I'm wondering where should we really try to grow. And you're saying that it looks like Twitch is actually trying to phase out any sort of controversial political stuff.
I mean, it's starting to feel like it, right? I mean, Vosh and Destiny, and yeah. I mean, and then the way it operates, where if you talk to somebody who's banned, even if your stream doesn't violate TOS, the way it's set up so that there's going to be a new ecosystem that forms around these huge streamers on YouTube, and for newer streamers wanting to get into politics, streaming politics, they're probably just going to start on YouTube. I would assume. It feels to me like Twitch just wants people to play Minecraft and Roblox and Fortnite.
Interesting. Wow. For some reason, yeah. Okay, so we'll jump into the next question. But Daniel, what are your thoughts? Do you have thoughts on Twitch? Have you just never gotten on? No interest?
I'll be banned within 5 seconds.
Yeah, you sure will. Extra Delight, thanks for your question. Says, what do you both think about sex workers in the world being unionized?
Go ahead, Mr. Girl.
I think sex work. I think it's going to happen either way. So whether you think it's damaging to the worker or not, I think it should be legalized and done in the most ethical possible way. So I think a union, if that helps them, then yeah, I'm all for it.
I'm against any kind of sex work, and I think that Islam provides for men who might have a preference for multiple women. There is polygyny. A man can marry multiple women. I think marriage is really a safe, functional institution that should be preserved, and it leads to the flourishing of society. And I think things like sex work really are damaging and destroy society. I think it's bad for the actual sex worker. Forget, put the question about soul and afterlife aside for the purpose of discussion, but it's going to psychologically harm her in the long run, as has been attested to by many former sex workers. It's also going to create a society where people are going to masturbate and become addicted to pornography, and the technology is getting worse and worse, where it's just destroying societies. Like Japanese society has been destroyed basically by pornography and sex work. Like a huge percentage of Japanese women are involved in sex work. It's like, I think 1 out of every 200 Japanese women have been involved in pornography. And the Japanese men are not interested in marriage, and even if they are getting married, they aren't reproducing. So the Japanese government is freaking out right now because the population is not going to be able to replace itself. So this is like a byproduct of sex work. It leads to and pornography. It leads to the destruction of entire countries and civilizations.
You got it. Thanks for your question. This one I'm going to try to read through. We got a couple more new ones that have come in. Mango T says, regarding sexual liberation, is it sexual liberation to ask a child wife to scrape semen from garments?
So, I mean,
I don't think that's a good faith question. I don't think you should answer that, Daniel.
Yeah, I already answered like the child marriage question, so
Yeah,
we can get into the homosexuality one if anyone's interested. But
I wouldn't engage with a bad faith question like that.
You got it. And CJ Canton, this one looks like it's just not quite on topic. I do want to say, we want to remind you folks, our guests are linked in the description. You can listen to more of MrGirl as well as Daniel right now, and that includes if you're listening via the podcast. If you're listening via Twitch, we are going to move over to YouTube. I put the link for the YouTube live stream in the Twitch chat. Highly encourage you to click on that as we're going to move off of Twitch. But I want to say, folks, thanks so much for being with us. Thanks for your questions. Thanks to Daniel as well as to MrGirl. It's been a true pleasure to have you guys here.
Thanks you so much, James. Thank you so much, Max. You're really very kind in your debating, and I think it was very good faith. And I, appreciated you responding to the kind of points that I was making.
Thank you. I appreciate you too. I appreciate the conversation. I appreciate the good faith and kindness as well. So just thank you both.
Thank you.
Great.
With that, I'll be back in just a moment, folks, with updates on upcoming debates, as well as updates about Twitch. And thanks so much, everybody, for tuning in. Guests linked in the description. Check them out. We'll be right back in just a moment.